Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Hope everybody is doing well as we officially have some basketball underway. I know it's just preseason, but it's still nice to see some NBA basketball back on our television screens. And as Sap and I are junkies, and I'm sure many of you listen to the show are basketball junkies, you've probably already watched a couple of preseason games. Obviously, I'm keeping my eye on the Celtics, who've played 2 games. They're 1-1 in those 2 games, though the game they lost to the Knicks yesterday, they didn't play any of their starters. So that, you can excuse that. But we did have 2 new pieces of news for the Celtics, which we want to talk about since, we're based in Boston here. And first is that Payton Pritchard, who through these first 2 games, Sap has been a standout player for the Celtics. He just inked a new extension with the team, 4 years, $30 million to essentially be the team's backup point guard. And this comes a year after he requested to be traded at the trade deadline last year, Sap, so not even a full year. So now he's committed to Boston. Boston's committed to him, at least in terms of a contract. So, Sap, when you look at the terms of that deal, do you think either side did better than the other, or do you think it seems pretty fair for both?
Seems pretty fair. That's the going rate, right? Because after the moves for Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, the Celtics had 6 legitimate NBA players that we could all agree on, right? Drew Holiday, Derek White, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Porzingis, and Al Horford. That's their big 6. They're going to start 5 of them. Whoever doesn't start will be the first guy off the bench. Now, you have to fill out rosters 7, 8, 9, and 10, not necessarily for the postseason, because you can get by with 7, maybe 8 players in the postseason. But during the regular season, you need contributions. You need minutes from spots 7, 8, 9, and 10. So now you've got Payton Pritchard as a nice backup point guard. I think Jordan Walsh, the rookie, is going to play some minutes. Maybe Sam Hauser is your deep shooter, and Luke Kornet's your backup big. I still think they need to address that position and get more quality at that position because, again, Porzingis has never been the most durable guy. Al Horford is 38 years old or about to turn 38, so you need one more big guy. But as far as Pritchard, yeah, talk about a difference from a year ago where he was probably going to ask to be traded, or if that was at least the story, to now all of a sudden becoming, I think, will be a significant member coming off the bench. If he plays 16 minutes a night, 18 minutes a night, the key with him is he's a defensive liability, Jet. The thing you have to do with him is make sure he's on the court with Derek White or Drew Holiday, or maybe even the rookie Jordan Walsh, who appears to be a really good defensive player. You don't want him out there with Sam Hauser and Luke Kornet so that his defensive deficiencies really get exposed. You need him out there with good defensive players, and then he can do what he does well, which is handle the ball, facilitate, and he is a legitimate three-point shooter. So I think this is a spot that the Celtics needed some depth, and he's been here for a few years, and I think he's going to fit in just nicely with some of the new additions.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of Joe Mazzulla, he really likes, what Pritchard brings to the table. Like you said, 3-point shooting, ball handling, and it looks like in the offseason, Pritchard's worked on his handle even more and his work to finishing at the rim, which he's done a lot better in these 2 preseason games, finding kind of crafty ways to score. Maybe he studied some tape of Isaiah Thomas, the Celtics Isaiah Thomas, not Zeke. And so I think, yeah, he'll be an important addition to the team in terms of what their goals are, for the next couple of years here. Like you said, they need healthy bodies who are capable of, they don't have to be well-rounded players who do everything. They just need to do 1 or 2 things really well. And Pritchard can shoot and handle the basketball. And that's really all he needs to do. He doesn't need to play a game that he's not capable of playing because the team is so talented. So I think it's a good spot for him. And also, I think a lot of people are expecting him to have a much more significant contribution this year than last because it's less of a logjam at point guard. And so from the Celtics perspective, I think they decided, okay, well, let's lock him into a reasonable contract now, because if he explodes this year and has a great year, as the backup point guard, somebody's going to want to sign him as a starting point guard, and it's going to cost us a lot more money to try to retain him. So I think it made plenty of sense from the Celtics side. And for Pritchard, it's his first, significant payday in the NBA, as he was on his rookie contract, being a late first round pick. So now he's putting $30 million in the bank, which isn't too shabby, Sap.
No, not bad at all. And you just like him because he's a fellow Duck, right?
Oh, so, yeah, absolutely.
You have that connection to Payton Pritchard. You make a great point, Jet. Like, when you have these players like Payton Pritchard or Jordan Walsh or Sam Hauser, they're limited players, but what you have to do is accentuate what they do well, which, as you said with Pritchard, is ball handling, shooting. Okay, let's not get him exposed on defense. You can't get totally well-rounded players coming off the bench all that often. I mean, you've got two really good guards in Derek White and Drew Holiday. And what makes those two guys really good is they're just good, solid basketball players, right? They can handle the ball, they can shoot, they can defend, they kind of fit into any system that you're running. They're really, really solid. They're total pros. So now he gives you, Payton Pritchard I'm talking about, gives you something a little bit different than those guys. So it's up to Joe Mazzulla to kind of define those roles and use those players in those specific situations. And again, don't expose their weaknesses. I don't know if you listened to Mazzulla on with JJ Redick, the podcast
I have
a
that.
week ago.
Yeah, I have that saved on my computer right now. Actually, I haven't listened to it yet, though.
Really good, really good. And in terms of Joe Mazzulla, I am embracing him a little bit more now because, again, he got named head coach of the Celtics like 2 days before training camp started a year ago. Young guy with really no experience and had to find his way through all of this. And I think at some point in the offseason, they gave him some media coaching. They hopefully will get him to be a little less intense. I mean, he's a very intense guy, but I think he really, on that podcast with JJ Redick, was almost an hour-long interview, which was really, really good. He
Well, and they
talked
gave
about
him a veteran staff too. You know, staff
exactly
that is helpful.
right, and he talked about that. You know, he's a big analytics guy, but he said when you get to the postseason, sometimes analytics go out the window because the sample size is so small. And he's right. I mean, you can't treat everything the same as a regular season game in January against Orlando as you would in Game 6 against Milwaukee in the Eastern Conference Finals. It's a different situation. So I think he's aware now that they have to play better situational basketball, and I think that will allow him to define these roles for the secondary players like Payton Pritchard, Jordan Walsh, and the like. So I think he's going to grow as a coach. He's a very bright guy. From everybody that talks about him says he's a very bright guy, maybe a little bit stubborn, and bright people can be stubborn. But I think he's going to really open up
Bill
a little bit more
Belichick.
this year. Yeah, to say the least. Yeah, that might be the best example ever. So, yeah, maybe Payton Pritchard looks at Bill Belichick and says, I don't want to be that guy at 71 where I'm this curmudgeon and stubborn and set in my ways. You know, Belichick, it feels like he's running a company that doesn't want to use email. He'd rather use a fax machine instead of email. So as far as Joe Mazzulla, I have higher hopes this year. After listening to that podcast, and maybe I'm shallow, but I think he's going to do a better job this year. And he has more of the types of players that he wants. And again, he doesn't have two critical voices in the locker room led by Marcus Smart and Malcolm Brogdon, who were very critical of him in public. It wasn't even behind closed doors. I remember, you know, Marcus Smart during the playoffs say, you know, Joe's getting beaten up, and rightfully so. And I'm like, wow, that's something odd that an NBA player would say about a coach. It really was. It was laughable. I mean, it was just like Marcus Smart had no filter. But I think he's going to do a better job this year, and he can define those roles and gets that back to Payton Pritchard, who, again, 16, 18 minutes a game. There'll be some games he plays more if you want to, you know, load manage one of your veteran guards in Derek White or Drew Holiday. And he gives you some of that versatility. I think it's a wise move for the Celtics and a good move for Payton Pritchard.
Yeah, you know, as far as Mazzulla goes, Sap, listen, everybody knew that he was put into an impossible situation last year because he had no time to prepare for the job. He was not even preparing to be the lead assistant on the Celtics, you know? Mm-hmm. So, you know, it was a huge elevation in terms of what he was expecting and what the team was expecting out of him. And so I think, you know, people gave him a lot of leeway, and that was totally fair. The problem that a lot of people had, especially me, and I think you as well, Sap, was that midway through the season, the Celtics extended him, which made no logical sense. And, you know, maybe they like the guy, but he hasn't, you know, the Celtics had a very rocky playoffs despite getting to Game 7 of the conference finals. I don't think anybody was overly impressed with their performance in the playoffs. And a lot of that has to do with coaching. And so I think it was fair to question why they extended him. But I would imagine if he loves this job, and I would imagine he does, and this is his dream job as somebody who grew up in New England coaching the Celtics, I can't imagine another job that you'd want. It would make sense that he spent this offseason analyzing what he did wrong last year and trying to improve in those places. So that's good that you don't want him to be stubborn, especially this early in his career. You get the right to be a little stubborn once you win a couple of championships, like Bill Belichick, like Greg Popovich, you know. You don't get the right to be stubborn when you're flaming out in the Eastern Conference Finals. So we'll just have to see where that happens. And as far as the rest of the Celtics roster goes, Sap, you know, I think I said this last week, and I've been having this debate with some people online and, you know, friends I'm talking to about, like, everybody seems to want to have like a perfect roster construction. Like it just can't exist with the salary cap. And people will say, well, the Celtics traded Rob Williams. They're thin at center now. And, other teams, have a better backup center. But you can't have, just like we were talking about, Zap, you have specialists coming off the bench, but you're not going to have all-stars coming off the bench and well-rounded players. That just doesn't happen. Like, you are constrained by the salary cap. You cannot sign 12 guys who do everything. So what you do is you find guys like Pritchard who can do one thing. You could find a guy like they signed O'Shea Brissett and Lamar Stevens. Those guys do other things. Jordan Walsh, you mentioned, Sap. He's a defender. So you try to fill it that way. You can't just say, okay, well, we have a hole at center. We're going to, we need to get Joel Embiid and have him come off the bench. Like, that's just not realistic. You build the best team you can. Some teams' strategy is to go with depth. I think the correct strategy is to go as front-loaded with star power as you can, and that seems to be proven in the NBA, in the history of the NBA, Sap, that star power beats depth.
Without question. I mean, look at the defending champion Nuggets, right? Nikola Jokic, now considered the best player in basketball. Jamal Murray, although he's never made an all-star game, I think he will this year now that he's more of a star in the league and people know more about him. The ones that follow the league closely, know how good Jamal Murray is, but now I think more of the public knows about him. And then you fill in the gaps with Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon. They're like your third and fourth best players. They're not necessarily all-stars, but they play specific roles. They're both good defenders. They can hit threes. So those are your next tier of guys. And then you fill in the rest of the roster with good, solid role players. Look, you're not going to see a roster like the Celtics had in the mid-'80s or the Lakers had in the mid-'80s when they were bringing guys off the bench that are like borderline Hall of Fame players. I mean, the Lakers at one point, their bench was Michael Thompson, who was the first overall pick in 1978, outstanding player. He was backing up Kareem at center. You had Michael Cooper coming off the bench, who was a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. You had A.C. Green, who was a really solid player. Heck, there were times Jamal Wilkes or Bob McAdoo, both future Hall of Famers, were coming off the bench of the Lakers. Look at the '86 Celtics. The backup center, Byron Scott, was a starter, but yeah, Byron Scott was the weakest starter on the Lakers. Danny Ainge was the weakest starter on the Celtics. They were like the two little kid brothers that the rest of the team looked at as like, okay, we'll give you some shots, but get out of the way. Let the men take over down the stretch, like Bird, Magic, Kareem, McHale, Parrish, all those guys. And at that point, you had the Celtics in 1986 with Bill Walton as the backup center, Hall of Famer. Scott Wedman was coming off the bench. He was a multiple-time All-Star. Jerry Seasting, who was a better version than Payton Pritchard, was your eighth guy. I mean, that's how deep that team was. You don't see that anymore. You can't afford that.
No,
and
there's
obviously
no such
there's
thing
better
as
run teams too. There's better run teams now too.
Sure,
Back then it was like a
course.
4-team league. Now there's better run teams. They're not just handing the Lakers and Celtics these players for nothing.
Yeah, no one's going to have perfect roster construction. Every team in the league, because of there's so many teams, and because there's a salary cap, is going to have a hole or two. It's just you can't say, like, the Nuggets who just won the championship. Like, look at that roster. Yeah, they have the best player in basketball right now, but they're not like the world beaters that you can say, oh, there's just no way to possibly beat that team. Every team is going to have some weakness. Just some teams are better at hiding it than others. So I think, Celtics fans who are complaining, oh, they got rid of Rob, they don't have a lot of depth at center. Like, look at what you do have. Focus on that. Focus less on what you don't have. And I think they've done a great job for themselves, Sap. And on the non basketball side, they have a new broadcaster that they announced, which is interesting for you and I, Sap, because we're in the media and we follow this sort of stuff. Drew Carter will be taking over for the legendary Mike Gorman after the season. He's also going to be doing away games this year as the play-by-play guy. I can't say I know too much about him, Sap, other than the Monday Night Football game that was broadcast on ESPN or Disney Plus in the vein of Toy Story. He called that game. I will say this: he's young and he's got a great voice. But those are the only two things I know about him.
He's 25. He's a Syracuse guy, so he's buttoned up and he's polished, right? He may not have the greatest personality, so he's going to be allowed to maybe grow into the role, do some of those road games this year because the legendary Mike Gorman will do the home games. I think Gorman will probably travel a few times on the road. I know he generally likes to go to Phoenix because his daughter lives there. And look, Mike Gorman, as I said, is a legend and also one of the nicest men I've ever met in media. Just a class act. I've loved his work for 40 years. I mean, he's been doing this for over 40 years. So let him enjoy himself now. He's 78, which is pretty amazing. I mean, he's still got his fastball which is incredible. I think Brian Scalabrine pulled a lot of weight on this because I remember Brian Scalabrine talking about Drew Carter last year. So I'm assuming that he kind of put in a good word for Drew Carter, and that NBC Sports looked at it and said he's a 25-year-old guy. You could probably get cheaper than if you took Sean Grandy and made him the TV guy as opposed to the radio guy, which is the role he holds right now. So NBC Sports, like every other company, is looking to save money, and maybe it appeases Brian Scalabrine, which I don't really agree with because I'm not a big fan of Scalabrine. I mean, if you're running your network to appease him, well, so be it.
Yeah.
But this guy obviously is pretty well polished. The Syracuse guys are buttoned up, good play-by-play guys, but I don't know anything about his personality. We're going to have to see what he does in those 35, 40 road games that he's going to do. And I'm just happy Mike Gorman gets to do one more year. Maybe the Celtics send him off with a championship and he can enjoy retirement and, go golfing and do the things that I know he loves to do.
Yeah, we'll obviously talk more about Mike Gorman throughout the season as it's, his last season. He is, like you said, Sap, a legit legend. And it'll be very strange not having him call games anymore after this season. But as far as Drew Carter goes, like I said, he's got a great voice. So he's got that's oftentimes one of the biggest hurdles for them to get over is having a good announcing voice. And he certainly does. My two concerns would be that he's not from Massachusetts. So a lot of times, I think the fans, I'll say me especially, likes to hear somewhat of a bias from their announcing crew. And he has no real ties to the Celtics at all. And so that is a little odd to me. And the second is he's so young. He's 25. I would assume he's probably a very ambitious guy, which I would not blame him for. And that I don't know that this is necessarily his dream job, that he won't jump ship to go to ESPN to call national games or something like that in, a couple of years. So you might have to look to replace him again. But those two things are speculative. Maybe he's a huge Celtics fan. I don't know. And maybe this is his dream job. I'm just saying that from my fan perspective, those would be my two concerns.
The homer aspect, I'm not as concerned with because I'm really not a Celtics fan. So I like to have someone who's more, honest. And Mike Gorman was able to do both, right? Still appease the Celtics fans, but also maybe those who were more neutral, who just wanted a good broadcast. That's what made Mike Gorman sensational. He'd call out the Celtics when necessary, but you knew he obviously wanted to see them do well. Team broadcasters want to see their team do well. It benefits them. I think Scalabrine's enough of a homer. We can agree that he can carry that part of it, and we'll see what Drew Carter is all about. And I think you make a great point too, Jed. He's 25. I would assume, let's see, ABC has Mike Breen, who's, I believe, 60 or 61. He's still sensational. And we see that these broadcasters can work into their 70s. I mean, Al Michaels is 78. He's not quite what he used to be, but he's still great because, in my opinion, Al Michaels is the greatest play-by-play announcer in the history of sports. And even at 78, when he looks like he's disinterested and can't stand on Kirk Herbstreit, he's still pretty good on Amazon Prime Games on Thursday night. Sometimes he doesn't know what stadium he's at, but that's okay. Most 78-year-olds don't know where they're at anyway. In fact, sometimes 60-year-olds don't know where they're at. But we'll have to see what happens with Drew Carter. Sean Grandy, I'm sure, is pissed because he probably expected to get the job. I think he's going to make more money still doing the games on the Sports Hub. Plus, he does a lot of MMA and other types of events that he makes. Bellator makes a ton of money doing that. So this gives him freedom. He'll probably do 60 Celtics games, and John Wallach will fill in on the other 20. I'm not a huge fan of Wallach, but he's just the guy who's there. He's like the perfect backup because he's not really ambitious. He's not going to go get another job. He's kind of settled here with his family, and he's probably the luckiest guy on Boston radio because he's on arguably the best show in the city, Toucher and Rich, and he doesn't really add much to it, but that's actually what they want him to do or not do. Fred Toucher and Rich certainly control that show and are phenomenal together. And Wallach's there for the headlines and to bring some sports knowledge. You don't want an overpowering personality as the third chair on that particular show. They're all set with Fred and Rich, and they're phenomenal. So,
as far as Grandy Sapp, he in the past couple of years, he's made no secret that he wanted to be the TV guy. So I'm sure he's not happy about it. But like you said, I don't know what the status of his contract is with Beasley and calling the Celtics radio games. But I would assume that could have been, if Comcast Sports had really wanted him, they could have figured out a way to work that. But I think, like you said, Sap, they probably went for somebody they thought would be cheaper and do as close to as good a job, if not, slightly below or slightly above.
And of all the radio contracts in the city, the Celtics is the least valuable. Although I think right now the Celtics are certainly the hottest team in the city. I mean, the Patriots are imploding. The Red Sox back-to-back last place finishers going 78 and 84. We don't even know what the hell they're going to do in the offseason. The Bruins, they have their cult following without question. Disappointing postseason. The Celtics are the team in the city right now. But as far as the radio contract, it's the least valuable. Obviously, the Red Sox still remain incredibly valuable on EEI. The Patriots contract's valuable on the Sports Hub. Even the Bruins is pretty valuable. I mean, basketball fans generally watch the games on TV. It's a tough listen on radio. As great as Grandy is, and he's phenomenal, the game is so fast paced yet that it's very difficult to follow on radio at times. I mean, years ago when it was a slower pace, it was easier to follow on radio. Now it's like so back and forth with so many
basketball and hockey
and
are very tough radio.
Incredible.
Yeah,
incredible to do. So, and Grandy's phenomenal. I'm a huge fan of Grandy. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Drew Carter. That I'm sure he will be criticized by a lot of Celtic fans because, again, you're replacing a legend. I mean, Tom Brady was here for 20 years. Mike Gorman's been here for twice as long and almost as beloved, considering what his role was. Obviously, he was the quarterback of the Patriots, but as a team broadcaster, everybody loved Mike Gorman. So Drew Carter has very, very, very big shoes to fill.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see. I would suggest he stays off social media for the first couple of games he does, because even if he does a great job, people will still complain about it. But moving off, as we often do, to the opposite side of the country and the Los Angeles Lakers, LeBron James is making headlines, as he always does. But this is for something that he wants to do after his playing career is over. He's made no secret that he wants to own a team. And he said he wants to own the eventual NBA expansion team that everybody assumes is going to happen in Las Vegas. He said it just makes sense for him to own that team. He said the NBA has a great relationship with the city, and that's the team. If he could, pick Sep where he wants to own. Starting fresh, I think it makes a lot of sense for him to start fresh with an expansion team. He could sort of put his fingerprints all over it. And Vegas is not very far from where his home is in LA. So he's calling his shot, Sep. I think the NBA has said not to expect expansion for at least another 2-3 years. And that seems to line up almost exactly with when LeBron will retire.
Yeah, it would be a team in Vegas, and most likely Seattle would be the other team. Yep. Bring pro basketball back to Seattle. That would make a lot of sense. And I think with LeBron connected to the Fenway Sports Group with John Henry and Tom Warner, he owns 2% of Fenway Sports Group. I'm not sure if he owns 2% of everything with Fenway Sports Group, but he did see LeBron wearing a Pittsburgh Penguins shirt last year when they bought the Penguins. So I'm sure he's 2% owner of the Penguins. Maybe he's 2% owner of the Red Sox. So if you want to blame the Red Sox back-to-back last place finishes, don't blame LeBron, because if he had impact on the Red Sox, they'd start winning again. He's got that type of impact. But certainly I think that could be the play, right? With Tom Warner, John Henry, LeBron being the face, putting up a lot of the money. But Henry obviously has more money than LeBron. Like, LeBron recently became a billionaire, but he may not have enough on his own to buy the franchise by himself. Because even the expansion franchise is going to go for what, $3 billion, I would guess, somewhere around there.
I'd say a minimum of 2.
Minimum of 2, maybe 3. So look at what the Golden Knights have done in 6 years. They won a Stanley Cup and are a valuable franchise in the NHL. So,
and the Aces, arguably the best team in the WNBA. So they already have a basketball culture in Las Vegas.
Part owner Tom Brady. No surprise that they're about to win the championship, right?
Yeah,
he's involved with that. As soon as Brady signs the paperwork to become part owner or limited owner of the Las Vegas Raiders, they'll go on like a 7-game winning streak. You just see. But when we look at all of that, that makes the most sense, right? So you get LeBron in as an owner, but also the Fenway Sports Group has deeper pockets, and you put that all together and you've got yourself a good ownership group. And then, Henry obviously owns the Red Sox, the Penguins, Liverpool FC. Next thing he needs is a football team, which I think
some racing company.
He's got a lot of things going on. Yeah, Nesson obviously is a cash cow, and all sorts of things like that. Maybe they'll have enough money to bid for Shohei Ohtani in the offseason.
One can
that's going to cost $500 million.
Well, Sap, what they were saying they were asking LeBron, would you want to own a team? Would you own any team in any city? And he specifically said Vegas. And you and I have talked in the past about where he could end up as an owner. And I said maybe Portland. You said maybe Cleveland. Is proximity to LA really, you think, what's driving him saying, I want to own this Las Vegas team? Or is it just
Absolutely.
being able to start fresh with an expansion team?
Probably both of those things. I don't want to like just agree with everything, but yeah, I mean, expansion franchise, you can kind of build that pretty quickly. You get some draft picks, you sign free agents. Like, what free agents don't want to go to Vegas? I mean, that's going to become, along with like LA and Miami, like one of the most desirable destinations in the NBA, right? There's no state income tax. Players love it there. So you'll be able to attract some free agents. He'll be able to attract some free agents. I
James
think
Harden
Cleveland,
is salivating at the possibility of playing
he's
basketball
already
in Las
there.
Vegas.
He's already there. He's going to play for free. In fact, he'll pay to play there.
Yeah.
As far as Cleveland, there's no way in hell that they're going to sell it to LeBron. I mean, the way it ended twice was
Do you
not
think
good.
he'd want it, Sap, if they were like, hey, LeBron, we're willing to sell it to you? I agree with you. I don't think they would, because I don't think it's a good relationship. But do you feel like he'd want to own that team?
I think it would be interesting because that's still his hometown and he still has connections there, right? To Akron, built a hospital, has spent a ton of money on the school systems. That's still his home. I still think he has ties there. It's not going to be the Lakers or the Clippers. They're not for sale.
No.
Vegas does make sense. Cleveland, I think his heart would tug at that type of option. But again, I don't think they'd be for sale unless they were able to, at some point, move on from Cleveland by the Pistons and then the Cavaliers become available. That's a possibility.
It would be a complicated mechanism.
It would be. Yeah. What's the owner's name in Cleveland?
Dan Gilbert.
Okay, Dan Gilbert is the Detroit guy. So I think he's always wanted to own the Tigers.
He has the Pistons. Long wanted to own the Tigers. Yes, right. He's made that very, very clear.
Yeah, maybe the Pistons would be an option. So he buys the Pistons. LeBron ends up with Cleveland. But Vegas makes the most sense. I mean, who doesn't want to be involved with something in Vegas? I mean, it's one of the hottest, literally the hottest cities in America.
That's true. What's interesting to me about, and I think, basically, I think he's telling you this is what's going to happen. I think we can look ahead in 3 years' time, and LeBron will be owning the team in Vegas. I would bet on it. Not to make a pun about Las Vegas, but I would.
What are the odds LeBron buys Vegas? Let's go to Vegas.
He's not saying this without having some sort of idea of that this is going to come to fruition. He's not, LeBron's not somebody who's, I'm wishing and I'm hoping. Like, he's got a pretty good sense of where the tea leaves are going to fall on this. My biggest question about LeBron owning a team, and I think it's what everybody's going to wonder, is how involved is he going to be? I not necessarily so much is he going to be good at it, but is he going to be the person who's making personnel decisions, or is he just want to be the person who's signing the paychecks and owning the team and showing up to the games? Like, what sort of role do you envision him taking with a team like that? We saw Michael Jordan do it very unsuccessfully in Charlotte. Sometimes it seemed like he was involved in personnel decisions. Other times it seemed like he was just content to play golf and let the team be bad.
Yeah, you either have to be all in or not, right? And I don't think he's going to be Jerry Jones, like, on his business card.
No, because that's general bad. Manager. You don't want that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Jerry Jones is, owner, general manager, public relations director, trainer, whatever. He's got 9 titles and probably gets 9 different checks from the Cowboys. But I think LeBron's got a lot of other things going on, like a media company, a lot of his charity work. He's involved with a lot of things. And then again, if it's Fenway Sports Group, he's kind of tied into the Red Sox and Penguins. Not that he's spending a lot of time on those 2 organizations. I doubt that. But, he at some point, he may just want to relax for a moment and breathe, because it's been kind of a whirlwind tour for the last 20-odd years.
Well, I'd imagine he'd want more than 2% of the whatever.
Absolutely.
The
that would be a completely different thing. Yeah, it's going to be more than that. I would think it'd be, again, look, these guys have so many connections. They make a phone call, they can raise $250, $300, $500 million. This is how Magic Johnson did it, right? Magic Johnson's, involved with the Dodgers, and he's also involved with the Washington Commanders. Like, he didn't put up all of the money to get involved in that, but these guys have so many connections. They can get on the phone and raise $500 million pretty quickly. And you want to be involved with players like that, people like that, because they're perceived to be winners. Same thing with Tom Brady. You want to be in with him because, first of all, even billionaires have idols or they're in awe of these guys. They want to be involved in it. And look, buying a sports franchise is a pretty good business decision. Like, they're not losing money. They only go up in value.
I think that, it's for guys like LeBron, who are just, have so accomplished and, all-time greats and, in some people's minds, the greatest of all time. it is very difficult to transition to a life outside of basketball in terms of playing, and that he is not. I don't know if he's capable of being hands off, and
Right.
I think that's why some guys can't be coaches. You know, as brilliant as or great basketball players as some guys are, or whatever player, baseball, football, hockey, it doesn't matter. They're too. It's almost like you're too invested. You're too micromanaging, and then the product suffers. And I think you're seeing that with Belichick. Obviously, wasn't a player, but like his hand is in too many things, and the team's suffering as a result. And for LeBron, I think it'll be a learning curve for somebody who, since he's been 22 years old, has been essentially been asked personnel decisions for all that time, Sap too. And so he's going to have to be able to figure out how to delegate. I'm not sure that he knows necessarily how to do that because he hasn't had to, because he's been supported by all these franchises, and he's been so talented on the court that he's able to sort of make his own decisions. I know I'm not putting it the best way, Sap, but do you feel like there's going to be a learning curve?
Exactly right. You're exactly right, because as you said, he's been part of roster construction with the Cavaliers, not necessarily with the Heat because it was still Pat Riley, back to Cleveland, the Lakers. We can have debates on who's the greatest player of all time. To me, it's LeBron as a pure basketball player. As far as the power of a player, he surpasses Michael Jordan in a sense that he essentially controls the league. Jordan surpasses LeBron when it comes to popularity, marketing,
global icon.
And no one's even close to Michael Jordan in that. He's in another stratosphere. Guy hasn't played in 20 years, and you could still make a case he's the most popular athlete in the world. I mean, my 7-year-old grandniece gets a new pair of Air Jordans every Christmas from a relative.
I don't know that there's any way to surpass him. Like, it's just like it was like perfect storm of timing. Yeah,
he's Michael Jackson. And I've always said LeBron is Prince. Prince, greater musician than Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson, bigger icon than Prince. Same thing here when you were talking about Jordan, LeBron. But you're so right. He's always been involved in that. All of a sudden, he's going to put, I don't know, $400 million up and not have his hand involved somewhere, or at least have someone that he's close to. Maybe it's Rich Paul.
Because he can't do everything. We've seen it doesn't work if you do everything.
No, you can't. You spread yourself too thin. You can't. Look, I don't want to get into politics, but there was a president once in my lifetime who I think is a greater man than he was a president, is Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter micromanaged the White House. You can't do that. You can't do that as president. You have to allow people that are your subordinates to do their job. Like Jimmy Carter knew what the schedule was of the White House tennis courts. Like, he was a micromanager because his background was as an engineer, and engineers, think differently than the rest of us. So that's how he ran the White House, and it was exhausting. You can't be that way. So he's going to have to find that fine line of, yes, be involved, be the face of the franchise, maybe be involved in the huge decisions, maybe interview coaching candidates, whatever, but he's got to entrust someone that can run the basketball franchise on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be fascinating to see because, Jordan strangely isn't a super public person, at least not anymore. I would imagine LeBron is going to be, as he always has been, very accessible throughout the whole process of being an owner. And it will be, I think, really just interesting to see how he does it, how often he's, with the team. I would imagine a lot. And, how often he's doing press conferences. It's sort of uncharted territory. There's been very few players who have been able to own teams because they just don't make enough money, despite how much money they do make. That just shows you the difference between a millionaire and a billionaire.
As Chris Rock said, Shaq was rich. The guy who signed his checks was wealthy. There's a difference between rich and wealthy. And I think LeBron will be more like Magic, because Magic's a people person. LeBron's a people person. Magic, LeBron, inclusive, right? Even the way they play on the court is inclusive. They want to get their teammates involved. Jordan was different. Jordan was completely different on and off the court, almost like a Garbo-esque type of person who we haven't really seen or heard much from Michael Jordan the last 20 years outside of The Last Dance. And man, there were some haymakers in that. That was enough to hear from him for a while. But they're completely different guys. And I think LeBron, he's going to have to learn because this is new. As great a player as he's been and smart businessman, I think, and all of that, this is something new because you want to be involved, but you also don't want to suffocate your team. Like, it doesn't it can't be that the owner is the biggest thing about the team, because we see that in football. The one team in football where the owner is the biggest star of the team is what? The Dallas Cowboys, and they haven't played an
Yes,
NFC
absolutely.
championship game since 1995. And as much as I like Jerry Jones, you have to obviously look and see that, there's better ways to do things.
Yeah, but I'm excited to see it because, again, it's sort of uncharted territory with the exception of Michael Jordan. And that obviously did not go well over his ownership tenure of the Bobcats and then Hornets. And now he's just happy with his having the Hornets been bought from him and being able to gamble all that away, I suppose. But it'll be something to keep an eye on. But for now, I think we should be in the mode of appreciating watching LeBron while he's still playing. As much as I'm going to root against the Lakers because I'll never root for them. It's just it's one of those situations where when he stops playing and he owns a team, you're going to say, man, the league is a lot different than without LeBron in it. Same as when Brady just this year's been weird with no Tom Brady in the NFL. And Aaron Rodgers happened to get hurt on the first series of the play. So it's been very strange. So I'd say appreciate it while you have it. As far as the rest of the NBA, Sap, still waiting to hear on anything that happens with James Harden. He's very disgruntled. The Clippers want him, but aren't willing to give up anything of value for him. And so we'll just have to keep monitoring that. But I'm just happy to have preseason basketball back. I saw a little bit of Victor Wembanyama yesterday against Chet Holmgren. That looks like a fun future matchup that we'll see 4 times a year, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously 2 incredibly skilled guys, and the Celtics have their version of Big Vic or any other enormous guy with crazy skill set. When I'm talking about Kristaps Porzingis, like Porzingis, I don't think he came into the league with the fanfare that Big Vic came into last year at the draft. And we're talking about this guy being the best player in basketball in 3 years and being, the best prospect to come into the league since LeBron. But when you got a guy 6'3", 7'3", 7'4", 7'5", with those types of skills, it's scary. The only problem with those big guys that play like that, durability is a question. Durability is already a question with big guys. I mean, like I've said a million times, that's why Kareem is revered as one of the 3 or 4 greatest players ever. In addition to all his accomplishments, he was so durable for a guy that size. You don't generally see that.
Really, the only one who was that size.
Yeah,
I
mean, Russell and Wilt, they were just physical freaks. I mean, but yeah,
Russell was 6'10". He wasn't that. Yeah, he wasn't 7'3".
No, not that size. No, and Wilt was 7'1". At one point, considered the strongest man on earth.
Yeah, you can throw Wilt. Whenever you talk about Wilt Chamberlain, you can just throw it out the window. It's not worth comparing him to anybody.
Different, yeah. He really, I mean, he stood out.
Seriously, if you want to talk about like physically how he played the game, like it's honestly, it's like
it's not fair.
It's not a fun debate because he was just so different than anybody that ever played really a sport in terms of statistics. Like there's no other sport where you're like, oh yeah, this guy is 1,000 rebounds ahead of everybody else.
Right.
And it's not like.
He averaged 50.4 points per game one season. He averaged more than 48 minutes per game one season. Like he never sat out. I mean, no,
throw it out the window.
But yeah, a lot of big guys, especially the thinner guys like Porzingis, like Big Vic, Holmgren already. We saw him miss his entire rookie season. That happens. I mean, look at even Ben Simmons, who's not as skilled as those guys and not as big as those guys. It's a problem. Bill Walton.
Yao,
one of the great centers of all time. Yao, exactly. I mean, there were problems with the feet. Look at Joel Embiid. Incredibly talented guy, but has missed a lot of time. So that's the thing you got to watch out for these guys. That's why you got to kind of keep a real close eye on their minutes.
For sure. But that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. Thanks to Full Press Coverage. Check out their website. Check us out on social media at JohnSap25 and at Jet Strider. We'll be back next week with a new podcast. Maybe get some update on James Harden, more NBA preseason. We'll talk to you then. Thanks for listening, everybody. See ya.